Are the Georgia Bulldogs going to land multiple five-star wide receivers in the 2024 class? That's the question that I have for you today, and I think there's a good chance of that happening if the Bulldogs can sign five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. You know all about him if you've been watching my videos for over a year now. #1 player in the entire country, elite quarterback that people have compared to Patrick Mahomes. He was in Athens this past weekend. I continue to hear that the Bulldogs sit in a very good position for him right now. They were the first to offer. He's known Matthew Stafford almost his whole life. His father played with the Detroit Lions with Matthew Stafford for a number of years. He knows all about the Georgia program, knows Mike Bobo, and I've continued to hear that Georgia sits in a very good spot for him. He plays out of Arizona, could come down to Georgia and USC, but if they land Dylan Raiola, I think they could easily sign multiple five-star wide receivers in the 2024 class. Now, you can't forget they have two wide receivers on the commit list already. Four-star wide receiver Nye Carr, in-state, speedy, explosive playmaker out of Colquitt County. And they have three-star Sokovia White, a North Georgia wide receiver. So they've got two guys right now who bring speed, burst, acceleration. A little on the smaller side, but they're two of the best in the state of Georgia. Now, let's talk about the five stars, right? Jeremiah Smith. If Dylan Raiola is the #1 player in the country, Jeremiah Smith is #2. And I think at the end of the day, he's going to push Dylan Raiola for that #1, player in the 24 class. 6'3", 200 pounds. I was able to watch him in person last weekend up in Cartersville, or Emerson, really, at the 7-on-7 Pylon tournament in Atlanta. He was unstoppable. As good as it gets. Size, speed, hands, explosiveness, the ability to run routes, create separation on his own. He's so smooth. He does everything so well. He recently took a visit to Georgia that weekend. Currently committed to Ohio State, but he's told me multiple times, hey, Brian McClendon is keeping Georgia in this. They continue to push hard for me. They want me badly. I'm a top priority for them. So I get why wide receivers want to play at Ohio State, right? I mean, they just turn them out. But Georgia's a good place to play wide receiver too. So the Bulldogs are pushing for him. I don't think they're going to get Jeremiah Smith without getting Dylan Raiola. If they land Raiola, I think there is an easy flip possibility that Jeremiah Smith flips from Ohio State to Georgia, which, is what Dylan Raiola would do if he ends up signing with Georgia, also a former Ohio State commitment. So Jeremiah Smith, 58 catches, just over 1,100 yards last year, 20 touchdowns. He is a touchdown machine, big-time five-star athlete, #1 wide receiver in the country, a guy to keep an eye on. Mike Matthews, in-state wide receiver out of Parkview, guy who just does everything well, multi-sport star, can also play basketball at the SEC level, 6'1", 185, will be at Georgia later this week. So when you're watching this video, he's going to be on campus in the next couple of days. I think Georgia will get an official visit from him in June. He has not confirmed that to me yet. 48 catches, just over 1,000 yards last year for Parkview, 8 touchdowns. Big time playmaker, could play in the secondary at the next level too. I've been told that Georgia wants him at wide receiver, just a natural, makes everything look easy. Big time ball skills, can go up and snatch the football out of the air, a great route runner, quick feet, explosive. He's another guy who checks all the boxes, easy five-star, and could end up as a top 10 player in the country. Definitely an in-state wide receiver to know. Ryan Wingo was in Athens last weekend out of the St. Louis area in Missouri, five-star wide receiver. This would be an epic failure for Tennessee. They love him. I believe he's the #1 wide receiver on their board. Georgia's, trying to get back into this. He's only been to Athens once. It was last weekend, but they made a big impression. For quotes on the 5 stars visit to Athens, make sure you go on to DAWGS because I spoke with him, and I think Georgia has made a big impression on him, and I think he's going to take an official visit to Georgia in June. So Georgia's, gonna push Tennessee for him. 41 catches last year, 785 yards, 19 yards a catch, 13 total touchdowns. But he also played defense. He made 44 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 defensive touchdown. Just a guy who can make plays wherever he's lined up. Big deal. Another guy who could, be a top 10 player in the country nationally when the time comes. So he's another 5-star receiver to know. Then you have Aaron Butler, not a 5-star, but a high 4-star out of Calabasas, California. I made another video recently where I talk about a California to Georgia connection that's going on. Aaron Butler is a big part of that. He could be the next California native to commit and sign with Georgia. They've already got one in this 2024 class, Peyton Woodyard on defense, but Aaron Butler, a guy who could play on both sides of the ball, could play defensive back in college. He told me personally that Georgia wants to play him at wide receiver. He caught 38 passes last year for 830 yards. That's about 22 yards a reception. He is a big-time playmaker. When he's involved, good things happen. And when he makes a catch, it's usually a big one. Again, averaging 22 yards per catch does not get a lot better than that. 13 touchdowns. He's going to take an official visit to Georgia in April. For the exact date on that and the weekend that he'll be in Athens, make sure you go over to DAWGS. So he's going to be in town for an official visit in April. 6'1", 170, a guy that has the green light to commit anytime he wants. Another big deal. Brian McClendon, would love to add a player of his caliber on the commit list. Amari Jefferson, another 4-star wide receiver out of the Baylor School in Chattanooga, currently committed to Tennessee to play baseball, multi-sport athlete. Very, very good. You also have Zion Reagans, another in-state guy, one of the fastest players in the country, track star out of Jones County High School. That's where Todd Hartley went to school, right? Georgia's tight ends coach. If they push for Zion Reagans, I think they have a really good shot to get him. Kind of quiet about his recruitment. We'll take a visit here, take a visit there. I think Georgia has other guys higher on their recruiting board. I don't know that for a fact. It just seems like other schools are kind of pushing for Zion a little bit more. At the end of the day, I do expect him to give Georgia an official visit, but with guys like Sokovia White and Nikar already on board, and I think they're going to stay committed and sign with Georgia, in December, they need more size because those two, again, a little slightly undersized, but bring a lot of speed and burst and acceleration to Georgia's offense down the road. But they need to bring in guys with size. So if they do land Zion Reagans, kind of another undersized, smaller receiver, they really need to go out and get a couple big time, bigger receivers that they can put on the outside, win some jump ball scenarios, and be giant weapons in the red zone, and in the end zone, so on and so on. So you can sign smaller players with, elite speed, right? But you also need, some bigger guys who can also block on the perimeter for you in the run game. Cameron Coleman, doesn't look like, he's probably the best wide receiver in Alabama out of Phoenix City, just outside of Columbus. Don't think Georgia is going to land him, but he's another guy who is interested in Georgia from what I gathered. I saw him at the Under Armour camp in Atlanta a few weeks ago now, and he was very, very good. I mean, he was easy to notice. If Georgia were to get back in it with him, he's a guy to definitely keep an eye on. 6'3", 175 pounds. Looked a little bigger than that, so he's a big wide receiver to get to know if Georgia, starts to get back into it with him. But they're in it very much for 3 elite 5-star wide receivers. Again, Jeremiah Smith is committed to Ohio State, and I think he's firm in that commitment. But that's a guy that Georgia is going to keep pushing for and, keep saying, hey, can you get back to campus? Can you get back to campus? I think he's going to give Georgia an official visit, but right now I do think he's locked in with Ohio State. If Georgia gets Dylan Raiola, which, again, could very well happen. Georgia's still going to have to fight off USC, Nebraska. He's got a visit to Oregon for their spring game. So it's going to be a fight, and I'm not ready to say right now that Georgia leads for Dylan Raiola. I think they did at one point, maybe in 2 different points. But, coming off a visit to Georgia, I know the Bulldogs are very high. They could be the leader behind the scenes. I think in his head, he's got a leader in mind, but that's all going to come down to official visits. He's going to be back in Athens for an official visit in June, from what I'm told. It's going to come down to those official visits. But if they land Dylan Raiola, I think Jeremiah Smith is immediately on flip watch. But even without Dylan Raiola, they're in a really good spot for Mike Matthews. They're going to have to beat out Clemson, Alabama, Tennessee for him. Ryan Wingo obviously made a giant impression on him last weekend. These are game-changing type of receivers and guys that Georgia needs to have. You can win national championships without elite receivers, but you still need a guy who can go up and make a big catch like A.D. Mitchell has done, like Ladd McConkey has done. And these are guys who I think have the ability to play early. There are plenty of young, talented wide receivers on Georgia's roster, but Jeremiah Smith is going to play very, very early wherever he goes, whether it's Georgia or Ohio State. That kid is just too good to leave on the bench. Mike Matthews, he's coming to play. He's a guy who I think is looking for playing time. might get it maybe at another school or two before Georgia, but Georgia's going to have to play him early, I think, if they do land him. Same with Ryan Wingo. He's a guy who is able to make plays early. You're not throwing him out there because you have to. I think these guys are going to push the older guys ahead of him. As you know, Kirby Smart throws out a few tweets. Not a commitment this second, but you never know with the Dogs and the way they recruit. But I think Georgia is set up to bring in a terrific wide receiver class. I think they'll get at least 1 5-star, maybe 2. Don't think it's going to be 3, but you never really know. But all I do know is that, you know, it's going to be a very, very good class. 2 on board already. They're in the mix with some of the country's best. Moving forward into the spring, into the summer, I expect Georgia to sign one of their best wide receiver classes in the last few years. That's what I'm saying right now. For more info on all these guys, we've got stories on multiple players that I just talked about over on Dog Post. So if you want more details, head over to Dog Post. Check out all of the recruiting notes that I've been putting up on Dog Post left and right. My fingers hurt. I've been typing up so many recruiting stories from guys who visited this past weekend, and I still have a few more to write. So make sure you head over to Dog Post, check it all out, and I'll see you over on the website.